is Lauren Kimball for ANI 150, and in today's tutorial we're going to pick up with the Sci-Fi crate and talk about making some of these little details and embellishments and the handles that are shown here in the reference image. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off these handles, and you'll notice from the last time we left off that this particular version of the crate has a mouth indentation to kind of suggest that the lid is separate from the base. And that is where we're going to start, and then we're going to talk about building these other things. Alright, so I'm going to begin by opening up a previous version that does not have those details nor the mouth. And this should be, if you're following along with my tutorial and building the same crate, this is about where you should have been before we left off. I'm going to go ahead and go under shading and turn on the wireframe on shaded. And what this does is allow me to see all the edges, make it a little less, one solid color. And what I'm going to do to create a mouth here in the crate is I'm going to use our trusty edge loop tool. So shift right click and go to the insert edge loop tool. Right next to it is this little box that opens up the tool settings. I'm going to go ahead and reset the tool so it looks more like you'll see it when you open up one of the school's computers, and that's the defaults. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and click on multiple edge loops, and I'm going to leave it at 2 this time. I'm going to go over here. Earlier on I had created a little bit of distance here from this indentation to the bottom lip, so that there would be space for such a crevice, and that is where I'm going to put these 2 edge loops in. Alright, now the next step is I'm going to go ahead and press Q on my keyboard. That's going to allow me to select this selection tool. That way when I click on my mesh, I'm not accidentally adding lots and lots more edge loops, because if I kept the edge loop tool on, then that's what would happen. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go into face mode. Click on one of the faces that was created from those edge loops, press shift and double click to the right or to the left, it doesn't matter which direction, and it's going to go ahead and select all the faces that are connected in that direction. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and shift right click and extrude faces. Now I'm a big fan of using the regular move tool when it comes to extruding, but in this case I want to go ahead and keep it with the default extrude tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this blue translation arrow here, like it looks like the move tool, and I'm going to push it in just a little bit. And because I'm using the extrude tool, you'll notice that it causes all of these faces to move inward when I grab that arrow, which is pretty cool. I'm going to click off, and another thing that I am going to have to start doing when it comes to these crates is minding my polygon allowance. Remember that when you are building something in Maya, and it's going to be going forward to a game engine, that oftentimes you're going to be given a polygon allowance. So don't go over this many polygon faces. In this case, the limit is 800. So I know that for moving ahead and modeling the other aspects that I'm going to run pretty close to that allowance. And one way to know is to go up to display, heads up display, and select your poly count. And right now it says there's about 484 faces, and we have 800. And that seems like a lot, but you'd be pretty surprised how quick that allowance is used up. We've got just a little over 300 faces left to use. So one of the things I'm going to do in this particular instance to save on faces, so I'm going to go in here into this crevice we've created, and I'm going to click on that backmost face, shift click, and select all the faces that were extruded inward. So if I go into wireframe, you can see which one I've selected. Okay, and then I'm just going to press delete. Now that did delete the backmost face that was extruded, but you'll see that there's this kind of inner lip that was created when I extruded. And I'm going to shift right click and go into edge mode, and I'm going to go in and click that edge, hold down Shift and double click, and it will grab all the edges that make up that inner lip. I'm going to rotate my camera, and I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom lip, holding down Shift and then Shift double clicking, and I should have both rows, if I did it correctly, of edges selected. Total of 72 edges in this case. Now before, if I had vertice mode selected, for example, I could Shift right click merge vertices. Now remember, the shortcut menu is going to change based on whatever it is that you're working in. So if I Shift right click, the merge vertices menu has now become the merge collapse edges menu. And I'm going to go to merge border edges. And this little box is going to pop up. I'm going to change that little box to 1 because there's not a huge spectrum of numbers to be used with this tool. It's either 0, which is off, or 1, which is on. And when I turn on that sew edge, it causes both edges to come together. All right. Now just to make sure that those sewed together, they should have, but just to make sure, I can grab my crate in vertice mode, Shift right click, go to merge vertices, go over here to this little box. Remember that we like to keep the threshold a little bit lower than the default, so 0.001, and press merge. And you'll notice the vertices over here, if you're keeping an eye on them, haven't changed at all, which means that the edge, the merge edge tool worked just the way it should have, merging the edges and their vertices. All right, and that is how I created that little indentation there that sort of indicates that the lid and the base are separate. All right. So next I'm going to look over at my reference picture, and I'm going to start working on these little kind of corner brackets here. So let's start with this middle one here, because that looks pretty easy. I'm going to go ahead and start with a polygon primitive, specifically a cube. Oh, and since we made a significant change to the crate, I like to go ahead and save. I'm going to go File, Save Scene As, and I'll just call this Lip Extrude. So I remember what it is I did in the file. Okie dokie. Oh. Alright, so I had a little bit of a goof when I was creating this. So if there's a sudden cut in the video, it's because I went back to this step because something went awry. Okay, so I'm going to create a polygon primitive. I'm going to go over here, and I see that what I'm creating are these little embellishments on the side, these little corner bracket thingies. I don't know the proper term, just roll with it. And I'm going to make this polygon primitive kind of look like it, so kind of keep it narrowed, and I'm going to bring it in like that. And then I'm going to push it in closer to my crate, go into the above viewport, kind of bring that in. This is the side that I want it attached to. So, as I had done before, the mesh got a little strange on me. I went to the rotation tool, I double clicked it, reset the tool, I turned on step snap under relative 15-degree increments, and I went ahead and rotated this so that it mostly aligns with the crate's panel there. Now the cool trick that I was showing before my tutorial went awry briefly was in utilizing the Move tool. Now the Move tool's defaults are set to world, which means that the X, Y, and Z are going to align themselves with this little compass in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. So the Z is going to point in the Z as it is in this world view, and the X is going to point just like it is in this compass. So wherever this compass is pointing, so if I go to perspective mode and I have my Move tool selected, basically here, let's make it even easier. I'm going to just say turn off everything so that you just see this. If you were to look at them together, they move together because it's adopted the same coordinates as the world. So it's like this little compass becomes kind of like a mini-me of our Move tool. Alright, the problem with that is I really just want to take this piece and move it backward. I don't want to keep jumping between my Z and my X handle. So what I'm going to do is go up here to Axis Orientation, and I can access that by double-clicking on my Move tool. And I'm going to go from World to Object, and look, see how the handles jump and change? That's because the object, when it was created, had its own object orientation. And all we're doing is telling the move tool to move by that object's orientation instead of the world as a whole. So now I can just push this backward, and there we go. I mean, it's not absolutely perfect, but it's pretty close. I could go back into my move tool and reset it and make some really small incremental, whoops, got to reset the tool. Some small incremental rotations there so that it's a little bit more evened up. Honestly, the bevel kind of is a little bit off, so just getting as close as I can. All right. So now that I've done that, and I mean it looks pretty good, looks pretty close to this, I'm going to go into my side view, and I'm going to grab that object, and I'm going to just make sure that, just like in my reference, it looks like this is just coming in just barely below the lip of this indentation. So I'm going to ask the length of this to match it and just kind of push it down a little bit, maybe by about a half a unit. Remember, this grid is set to, if you want your grid to look like mine, you can just go into Display, Grid, and change the subdivisions. My subdivisions are actually set to 80. And you see nothing changed because it was already applied to 80. But the default is typically much smaller. Alright, so here's our piece. It's looking good. Now I wanna shape it so that these other two sides wrap around the crate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into object mode, and I'm going to grab the faces here. Well, actually one face at a time will probably be just fine. And I'm going to go ahead and extrude. And I'm not going to extrude using my object's orientation. I'm going to use the move tool, so W, but I'm going to reset this back to world. And so the reason I'm doing that is so that when I pull this out, it's going to match the x-axis that this crate is aligned with. So it's going to wrap around the crate instead of moving out on the x-axis of the object, if that makes sense. And I'm going to go over here, grab this, press G, and from above I can kind of, oops, G doesn't work, you can always shift right click, extrude face, and just go ahead and eyeball it, make it about the same length as the other side. You can tweak it a little bit. There, and that looks pretty good. All right, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab each corner of this by the vertices, use my scale tool, and push these in so that they match more of what we see on the box. Okay, press F8. And there is that little side panel wrapped around the crate. Now I feel like this one here is a little bit smaller, so I can always go back in and grab this, push it in, and maybe push this whole thing in to a degree, because, go to F8, go back to object mode. That way it doesn't seem quite so thick. There we go. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now, some of you are probably wondering, well, doesn't it need to be attached? No, not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily need to be attached. It does need to be combined. It needs to be acknowledged as a whole mesh to Maya, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be physically attached to the mesh in order to work. So another cool thing we can do here as far as saving on our face allowance is deleting faces that we don't see. So I'm going to click on this little decorative part, and I'm going to press Control-1, which allows me to isolate it. I'm going to turn it around and go into face mode and just select these three faces and delete them. And then go back into Control-1. And there we go. Now we have three less faces to have to fuss with. Okay. All right. So now that we've modeled that bit, let's go ahead and model this bit down here. I'm going to take a little bit of a break and pick up in the next tutorial.